He didn't want to be in our family, but he wanted to stay in Budapest. And I said, you'll have to go somewhere else to do that. We can't treat you. And Renee, especially, my wife, she said, you're our son. We can't treat you that way. And he didn't realize that a true mother and a true father couldn't treat their son as a rentor, in this case as a servant. You know, God will discipline his children, but he'll never stop loving them. He'll never stop accepting them. And this son, when he cooks up this scheme, he's thinking of a plan, but he doesn't deal not only with his heart, he doesn't really think that way, but he doesn't understand the love of his father. Let's go a little further. I got all that. His solution's inadequate, but when he comes back, what happens is he comes back, and the father, it seems, it says in the passage, but while he was still a long ways off, and his father saw him and was filled with compassion. We love that part. And he ran to him, to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. And that phrase, when he was still a far way off, he saw his son. It really beckons one to think that he was oftentimes watching the horizon. He was watching the horizon for the return of his son. And there's no explanation given. Did he really know that someday his son would come back, or was he just wishful thinking? But he did know one thing, that if his son were to return, he'd have to move fast. He'd have to move fast and join his son. Let's see if we'll go back on that. Excuse me. He'd have to move fast because he had to basically rescue his son before he came into the city, to rescue him from the Ketzashah ceremony, the rejection, the formal rejection by the village. He had to move quickly, and he had to meet him before he came in, so that the elders of the village wouldn't formally reject him. But what we see is the father is, we begin to see a different picture, a more full picture of God. Not only is the father kind of God who loves us even when we're prodigal, he's a father kind of God who forgives us. And when his son came, he accepted him first just as he was. He ran out to meet the boy to show the village elders that he was accepting them. He was accepting his son. He was paying a price. He was going to let the family fortune that his son lost go to receive his son back, and he didn't want retribution against him. But the very running of the father was also another example of how the father was responding totally different than the traditional Middle Eastern patriarchal father. Patriarchal fathers of that day and even of this day do not run. They walk majestically. For the father to lift up the edges of his robe and to show the leg, which was also verboten, and to run out to meet the son was totally counterculture. And but he wants to reach the boy before the boy reaches the village. He falls on his neck. He kisses him before, and catch this, I always thought, he kisses him, he accepts him, he hugs him before he hears his speech. It's before. He accepted him just as he was. Why? His son. Then he accepts him even before he heard him repent. I don't think the boy had repented at that point. The boy repented when his father fell on his neck, kissed him, and threw his arms around him. And as a result, let's see, the son was just totally surprised. And this was the solution of the father. He runs out and meets his son. Like I mentioned, the Middle Eastern fathers, the patriarchal fathers do not ran. This father ran, and he embraced his son, and the embracing totally surprises not only the village, but his son. And what happens is that when the boy saw his father to run out to meet him, to protect him from the ceremony, when he felt his father wrap his arms around him and kiss him, when he, the son, should have been the one falling to his knees, his father's knees, and kissing his father's feet, his heart melts. He finally understands the impact of rejected love. And the issue, oftentimes we think the father interrupts the son, but the son changes his speech, and he says, the son said to his father, "Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I have no plan. I am not worthy to become your son, or to be called your son." But the father had a plan. The father, with his acceptance, restores his son. The boy heart is melting. He sees for the first time the agony of the rejected love, and his heart changes. And suddenly the problem is no longer the family fortune that was lost, but the relationship that was broken. And he begins to understand, and it's, in a sense, it's the picture of the difference between the law and the gospel. That the law can't restore a relationship, but the gospel can. And he realizes the change to take. He realizes what's wrong, and his heart is changed through the life-giving power of grace. The famine. Oftentimes, for so long, I thought, well, he kind of repented in the pig pen, but you got to look at several things here. The father never heard that speech until he ran and embraced him. He didn't hear the speech, and he didn't hear the same speech. The father didn't know what he was musing upon. He didn't know his plan, and but the famine didn't break his heart. It just made him hungry, and it drove him to a plan to get a living. What's happened in our situation is that Matt, after he got out of high school and went to college, he began to, it's really interesting, he got out of the Christian legalism that was going on in that high school. And it's really amazing. The day after he graduated and came out from under those rules, the very day, he re-embraced us as a family. But he didn't want to have anything to do with God. And that's where he still is. It's amazing because he returns our love, he returns our affection. He's a very honorable son, but he has nothing to do with Christianity. He likes some of the virtues of Christianity. He thanks us for the virtues we taught him, but he doesn't see the power within. It's an amazing mystery to me. But what has happened is, as he's returned to the family, he sees that he can't do anything to earn a relationship with us. It's just on the basis of love. And that's where it's kind of interesting to see some of these things. Now, not only did the father completely accept, let me go through this. Suddenly the problem is no longer the family fortune lost, but rather the father's heart broken. The failure of the law to redeem opens his father's heart to the gospel. And for the first time, the father's broken heart with all its pain becomes known to him. Now for the first time, costly grace was perceived, accepted, and became for him a life-giving power. Life-changing power, Now, here's what the father does. He gives him complete restoration. He gives him the best robe, which is a sign of position within the family. He gives him back the signet ring, which is kind of like handing him back the family MasterCard. He puts sandals on his feet to show that he's a free man and not going to be a slave. Even though he wanted to be a slave or a worker, he gives him back his sandals, or he gives him sandals to show that his position, that he's a free man. And then he wants to celebrate. He wants to kill the fatted calf, which was really a large celebration. He dresses him in accordance to the family identity, and he throws a banquet to celebrate the father's joy. And that's the first son. He forgives, he gives complete restoration, he throws a celebration. The second son then comes into play. Now, before we get there, I want to ask you, what do you think of when you think of a prodigal? Do you think of this? Oh, you can't see it. Flip the light off for a second there. Do you think of this guy? Kind of a really radical-looking guy. He has metal all over his face, and he's got his hair done. He looks like a total rebellion. Actually, I think he's a Christian guy who's, or do you think of someone like this? And that's me with my two sons. The one on the left is Matthew. Wait. Right. This one's Matthew on this side, the short one, and that's Mark, the decathlete. But yet both, in this case, were not these guys, but what we're going to begin to see is that the second son, the older son, was prodigal as well. Luke 15:25 through 32. Can we flip the light back on? Again, somebody want to read that for us? It's just 25 to the end of the chapter, actually. Thank you. It's very interesting because this is the second prodigal. He leaves the house, he leaves the celebration, only to be sought after for by his son. Oops, where's that guy? Oops, there we go. Two prodigals. One was younger, one was older. One was blatant, that is in your face. Give me that portion of my inheritance. And the one was subtle. He continued working in the field. One was rebellious. One was resentful. One left the country, and one left the celebration. One was a lawbreaker, the younger, and the other was a law keeper. But neither knew the love of the Father, and neither had a relationship with the Father. It's very interesting. As my other two children have walked through this process with them, they really have to fight becoming the older prodigal because of the resentment sometimes they have. And yet, they're really growing. It broke our heart. It broke their heart. And yet, still, I think the Scriptures and the relationship has to be maintained in the family, but sometimes it's just not fair. There's an article I read, I forgot who wrote it now, it says the older brother has a point, and it's justice. But yet justice and grace are met by the sacrifice of the Father in this case, but the sacrifice of the Son in our case. Two prodigals. The older was upset, and he said, and one of the things, he became angry. He refused to go in. I've got to move kind of fast now. And he because he thought that the celebration was for the Son, that was in honor of the Son. But if you read carefully, what you'll see is that the celebration, the Father is celebrating that He has found His Son is back safe and sound. And in this passage when He says, because He has Him back safe and sound, the Greek word there is hugianio. And that's consistently translated shalom in the Hebrew versions of the New Testament, and in the Pentateuch, shalom is most often translated with this Greek word. And any Hebrew listener would have heard shalom when he said that. And shalom has also, any first century Jew, when he heard that word, he or she mentally translated the Hebrew word shalom. And that means not, and shalom doesn't just mean peace.